Good evening and welcome to this special edition of RFL. I am Richard French as we honor the life and mourn the passing of South African civil rights icon Nelson Mandela. And also tonight we have interviews on subjects important to our region, including gun safety and climate change. But we begin, of course, with Mr. Mandela. Plans now set for his official memorials, and for that, let's bring in ABC's Karen Travers.
All over the world, the tributes continue to pour in for Nelson Mandela.
Help us to emulate him.
He will be certainly remembered for the way he led, his dignity.
Crowds gathered all day outside the Johannesburg home where Mandela passed away. There were tears and prayers. But there was also singing and dancing as South Africans celebrated their first black president. Details have been announced about the official services that will honor Mandela's life and legacy.
We should all work together to organize the most befitting funeral for this outstanding son of our country.
Mandela's body was moved earlier today from Johannesburg to Pretoria. He will lie in state there from Wednesday to Friday. This Sunday will be a national day of prayer across South Africa. On Tuesday, an official memorial will be held at the Soccer City Stadium in Johannesburg. The 95,000-seat stadium has symbolic meaning. It's where Mandela made his last public appearance, the closing ceremony of the World Cup in 2010. Past and present leaders from all over the world are expected to travel to South Africa next week, including President Obama, who considered Mandela a personal hero.
The idea that every single human being ought to be free and that oppression can end and justice can prevail. That's what Nelson Mandela taught us.
Nelson Mandela will be buried at his rural home in South Africa next Sunday. Karen Travers, ABC News, Washington.
Karen, thank you. As I mentioned, this will be a special edition of RFL and helping provide a little more context and depth into just who Nelson Mandela was and why he means so much to so many. To do that, we're going to be tapping the resources of our partners over at ABC News and also to our core panel members, senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman and longtime political journalist and author Dominic Carter, who will share more of his memories from not only meeting Mandela, but also his trip to South Africa that I know still stays with you, Don.
Well, that is indeed the case, Richard. And when you're discussing Nelson Mandela, what's clear is that the different hats he wore. He was a civil rights icon, a political prisoner, a force for peace, a uniter of a nation, a president, an elder statesman, and a gentle and positive soul. He spent 27 years in prison, then forgave the men who put him there, and he believed in the human spirit that we can and should do better. His life story, Richard, reads like something only of a fiction writer could dream up, but his life was real and he lived it. Our narrator is Robin Roberts.
Nelson Mandela, a leader who inspired a nation to hope.
That we shall build a society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall.
Forgive.
A rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world.
And believe in a better future. His tribal name, given at birth, means troublemaker. But on the first day of school, his teacher gave him a new name.
You must have a Christian name. So I say, no, I don't have one. She says, from today, you're going to be Nelson.
He was a boxer who became a lawyer and a leading voice in the African National Congress, the ANC, struggling to end the inequality of apartheid. White ruled South Africa's viciously enforced policy of racial segregation. But in 1960, after police shot and killed 69 protesters, the ANC, which had always been nonviolent, created a military wing under Mandela's command.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and nonviolence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks.
The regime, determined to maintain white rule, saw the inspiring young revolutionary as a threat.
Our struggle is a truly national one. It is a struggle for the right to live.
Mandela was imprisoned in 1962 and 2 years later sentenced to life in prison, accused of working to overthrow the government. In court, on trial for his life, he said this.
I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society. It is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
4 miles off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa, on Robben Island, Mandela spent most of 27 years cut off from the world, but not forgotten.
To spend 27 years at the prime of your life is a tragedy. And I regret, those years that I have wasted in prison.
Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison.
There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa.
Released at the age of 72 in 1990, he remained ever vigilant that his country and its freedoms rested in the hands of the people.
I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant.
And for the people of South Africa, Mandela's release ushered in a new era of hope and the end of apartheid.
Today, the majority of South Africans, black and white, recognize that apartheid has no future.
In 1994, South Africans cast their ballots in the first democratic election.
In Soweto this morning, applause for the first black voter in the township's history.
Mandela became the country's president, the first elected by all its people.
We are all South Africans. We have had a good fight, but now this is the time to heal the old wounds and to build a new South Africa.
After ruling for 5 years, Nelson Mandela passed the torch to the next generation and became an elder statesman to the world, a fighter, a visionary, the voice of his people, and a moral compass for us all.
And I can tell you firsthand, Richard, from having the opportunity of a lifetime to interview Mandela during his historic visit to America in 1990, myself and Ted Koppel of then Nightline, we got to spend just a little bit of time with Mr. Mandela. But from that little time, Richard, he had a lifelong impact on you. But to truly understand Mr. Mandela, and it was mentioned during Robin's piece, and his message of forgiveness, in my opinion, requires a trip, as I did, to Cape Town, South Africa, and the prison he called home, Robben Island. You're looking at some of the shots there. American prisons would be considered a luxury in terms of the standard to what I saw at Robben Island. And Mandela's vision was to turn the prison, Richard, as you well know, into a, quote, university to show the world of how they were forced to live. Now, one photo, this one in particular, tells the story where most prisoners receive no education at all. That sign there shows that education was considered a privilege, Richard, and definitely not a right.
You mentioned it. I've known family who've gone there. I've always wanted to go to Robben Island, but we were saying in the break, the 27 years that he spent as a prisoner in Robben Island in many ways made him. I mean, he was certainly a national figure of the ANC. There was a violent wing of the ANC. It wasn't peaceful, the resistance they put up, because they thought they had to break through. But when he was put there, he was made an icon and a martyr, and they rallied. And then when he was released, to the surprise of so many, it's, you know, in many ways he was Malcolm X, and when he went in, Dr. King when he came out, in terms of some of the messaging.
That's an interesting way to put it. It really is.
And because he chose to do reconciliation and to try and unite the country rather than divide it, that is the most important chapter of his life, as everyone remembers. But it was a fascinating life. I can't think of another figure, at least in the 20th century, who did so much. and had so many different chapters and shaped the nation so much. And we talk about FDR, we talked about other presidents, but really, he took a nation and he changed it completely. And he not single-handedly, but he was a torchbearer for equality of a whole country, and in certain ways, a whole continent.
I've been trying to think about this too, and other people who you might be able to compare him to. I guess Gandhi is the only one who comes to mind. Also with the formation of a country, also a revolution, a quiet, peaceful, I mean, it didn't start peacefully and wasn't always peaceful, but a revolution in the country, and also the moral exemplar that he proved himself to be. And you know, nobody's a perfect person. There are no perfect people out there. But it just shows that, you know, anybody can be in that perfect role if you set your life to it and you live up to that ideal. And
you know, Dom, to Andrew's point, I was thinking about this too. How many times are we let down, even by the officials we like? There's moral failings. Nobody's perfect. But there's always political calculations. And I'm not by any means saying that Nelson Mandela didn't do political calculations. He certainly did. But he didn't do it for himself. He wasn't trying to gain something personally. You always got the impression in every single person that's talked to him, and I've heard de Klerk talking about what it was like, but even other people, I mean, for example, I heard Barack today talking about, not President Barack Obama, but the former Israeli Prime Minister, who was talking about he tried to convince us that our fight with the Palestinians was similar to what he went through. He tried to get us both to. And while I didn't agree with everything that he was saying, I knew from where it was coming from. And it was coming from the idea of equality and of reconciliation. It wasn't that easy for us to do, but you always got that his agenda was for the right thing. And how often can you really say that about people?
Not often.
Right?
And to serve one term as president, when many presidents in countries in Africa serve for a lifetime, and then to walk away from the entire thing. But think about this. I was only a journalist for maybe 3 or 4 years when all of this ANC stuff started. Think about this, Richard, to what your point you were making earlier, the obstacles he had to overcome. Imagine you're in prison and President Ronald Reagan is adamantly against your point of view. Margaret Thatcher in England is united with President Reagan, adamantly against you, while you're in prison, and somehow at the end of the day, you come out on top.